I remember last Tuesday night so vividly. My grandson, Jake, slipped me a note under the dinner table, his hands trembling. It simply read, "Grandpa, check the storage unit Dad rented last month. Unit 247. The combination is Mom's birthday backwards. You need to see what's inside before Friday." I looked up, but he wouldn't meet my gaze, just stared intently at his plate while Caroline, his stepmother, chatted merrily about her shopping trip. In that moment, I knew, deep down, that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Let me explain a bit about myself. My name is Richard, and I'm 67 years old. I live in a peaceful neighborhood in Winnipeg, Manitoba. 3 years ago, my beloved wife, Patricia, passed away after a battle with cancer. Our entire family was devastated, especially our son, Thomas. He was 42 when he lost his mother, and it hit him incredibly hard, as it did all of us. Patricia truly was the glue that kept our family together. About 18 months after Patricia's death, Thomas met Caroline at a charity gala sponsored by his company. She was 38, attractive, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in him. I watched them get married just 7 months later, and I admit I thought it was too fast. But Thomas had been so lonely. His first marriage had ended badly a decade earlier, and he'd been single ever since. From that first marriage, he has his son, my grandson Jake, who is now 15. Jake divides his time between his mother's home in Toronto and Thomas's house here in Winnipeg. When Caroline first entered our lives, Jake seemed happy. He told me his dad was smiling and laughing more often. I felt a huge sense of relief, thinking perhaps this woman was exactly what Thomas needed to heal. Caroline was sweet to me too. She called me Dad, brought me homemade pierogies, and even asked about my woodworking projects. She really did seem perfect. But about 6 months ago, I started noticing unsettling changes. Thomas looked constantly exhausted. He'd lost weight, and dark circles perpetually shadowed his eyes. When I questioned him, he brushed it off, attributing it to stress from work, as his accounting firm was undergoing a merger. It made a certain amount of sense, I supposed. Yet, other things began to surface. He sometimes seemed confused, even forgetful. He'd repeat himself during conversations. On one occasion, he couldn't even remember where he'd parked his car at the grocery store. Thomas has always been incredibly sharp, and this behavior was completely unlike him. Jake noticed it too. During his visits, I could see the profound worry in the boy's eyes. He would discreetly watch his father, studying him when Thomas wasn't looking. But whenever I tried to talk to Jake about it, he would clam up, insisting everything was fine, just typical teenage stuff. Then came that dinner last Tuesday. Caroline had invited me over for what she charmingly called a family meal. She had prepared roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the whole works, but Thomas barely touched his food. He just pushed it around his plate, his movements slow and uncertain. Caroline kept placing her hand on his arm, saying things like, "You need to eat, honey. Keep your strength up." Something in the way she said it made my skin crawl. That's when Jake passed me the note. I didn't truly process the gravity of what that note meant until I was back home. My 15-year-old grandson was asking me to break into a storage unit to essentially spy on his father and his stepmother. The combination was Caroline's birthday backwards. How on earth did Jake even know about this unit? And what could possibly be inside that was so critical he would risk getting caught passing me such a dangerous message? I didn't sleep a wink that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through thoughts of my son's deteriorating health, Jake's frightened eyes, and Caroline's seemingly perfect smile that now felt so unsettling. Wednesday morning, I drove to the storage facility on Pembina Highway. It was one of those massive, impersonal places, stretching with rows upon rows of identical orange doors. I found Unit 247 on the second floor. My heart hammered in my chest as I entered the combination. 421987. The lock clicked open. Inside, the unit was mostly empty, save for 3 cardboard boxes stacked neatly in the corner. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight. The first box contained files, legal documents. As I began reading, my blood ran cold. There was a new will, Thomas's will, dated just 2 months ago. In it, everything, the house, his investments, his life insurance policy, his share of the accounting firm, everything was left solely to Caroline. There was absolutely no mention of Jake. My grandson, Thomas's only child, had been completely written out. But that wasn't even the worst part. The signature at the bottom looked like Thomas's handwriting, but something felt off. The T was wrong. Thomas always loops his T in a very specific way, a habit he'd picked up from his mother, Patricia. This signature was close, but it wasn't quite right. I had seen enough of my son's writing over 67 years to know the subtle difference. The contents of the second box made my hands tremble uncontrollably. Inside were medical supplies, syringes, bottles of medication I didn't recognize, latex gloves, and a small notebook filled with handwritten entries. I flipped through the pages, my stomach churning with dread. The entries were meticulously dated, going back 4 months. Each one detailed dosages, times, and effects. Increased confusion today. Speech slightly slurred. Memory gaps more pronounced. Forgot colleague's name at meeting. Balance issues. Nearly fell on stairs. Caroline was keeping a log. She wasn't just observing Thomas's decline, she was documenting it because she was the one causing it. I pulled out one of the medication bottles and quickly Googled the name on my phone. Scopolamine, used medically in low doses for motion sickness. In higher doses, it causes confusion, memory loss, and cognitive impairment. In very high doses, it can be fatal. It's sometimes grimly referred to as devil's breath. My son wasn't sick. He was being poisoned. The third box contained surveillance photos, pictures of my house taken from various angles, pictures of me at the grocery store, at the hardware store, even on my morning walks. There were printed copies of my bank statements. How on earth had she obtained those? A floor plan of my house, with certain rooms, my bedroom, my study, where I kept important documents, circled ominously. There was also a life insurance policy, my life insurance policy. I had made Thomas the beneficiary years ago, when Patricia was still alive. The policy was worth $500,000. Someone had paperclipped a sticky note to it with a single word written in neat, feminine handwriting. Next. I nearly vomited right there in that storage unit. This wasn't just about Thomas's money anymore. Caroline was planning to kill my son, and then she was coming for me. I immediately took pictures of everything with my phone, every document, every page of that notebook, every single surveillance photo. Then, I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I had to think. I had to plan. If I went to the police right then with what I had, would it be enough? A forged will, some suspicious medication, a creepy notebook. Caroline could easily claim Thomas had asked her to pick up his prescriptions. She could argue the notebook was simply her way of tracking his symptoms to assist his doctors. The will, she might say, had been legitimately signed during one of Thomas's confused periods. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof she was actively poisoning him. I needed her caught in the act. That evening, Jake called me. We had never talked on the phone before. He always just texted. His voice was quiet, scared. "Did you go?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "I saw everything." "Jake, how did you know about that storage unit?" I asked him. He was quiet for a moment. "I followed her," he finally confessed. "Last week, Dad was at work and she left the house with these boxes. I thought it was weird, so I took my bike and followed her car. I saw which unit she went into. Then I waited until she left and I tried combinations until one worked." "That was dangerous, son," I told him, my heart aching. "I know," he said, his voice small, "but Dad's getting worse. Grandpa, he fell down yesterday, just collapsed in the kitchen." Caroline called 911, but by the time the ambulance came, she'd already cleaned up whatever he'd been drinking. The paramedics said it might be a heart problem. They want to run tests, but I know it's her. I've seen her putting stuff in his coffee. She thinks I don't notice, but I do. My 15-year-old grandson had figured out what was happening, and he had been living with this terror, trying desperately to protect his father. My heart broke for him. "Jake," I said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't eat or drink anything Caroline prepares. Nothing. Make your own food. Get it from restaurants. Whatever you need to do. And most importantly, don't let her know you're suspicious. Can you do that for me?" "Yeah," he replied. "I've been doing that for weeks." "Good boy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to fix this, but I need a few days. Can you hold on for a few more days?" "I think so," he responded. "But Grandpa, Dad's appointment with the heart specialist is Friday. I heard Caroline on the phone talking to someone, her brother, I think. She said something about how Friday would be the perfect time because everyone would just think it was his heart." Friday, 2 days away. Whatever Caroline was planning, she was going to do it soon. I spent all Wednesday night researching, planning, and thinking. I called an old friend from the police force, Bill Henderson. We'd known each other for 40 years. He had retired 5 years ago, but he still had vital connections. I told him everything, and he listened without interrupting. "Rich," he said when I finished, "this is serious, but you're right that we need more. Judges don't like speculation, even good speculation. They want concrete evidence. Here's what I think you should do." He outlined a plan. It was risky. It was going to require me to be a better actor than I'd ever been in my life. But, I thought, it just might work. Thursday morning, I called Caroline. I put on my best concerned father voice. "Caroline, dear," I said, "I'm worried about Thomas. He looked so unwell at dinner the other day. I was thinking maybe I should move in with you two for a little while. Just help out. Make sure he's eating properly, getting his rest." There was a noticeable pause. Then her voice, syrupy sweet, came back. "Oh, Dad, that's so thoughtful of you, but honestly, we're managing fine. Thomas just needs rest. The doctor says it's probably stress from work. You know how dedicated he is to that firm." "I know," I pressed, "but I'm his father. I want to help. Besides, you shouldn't have to shoulder this burden alone." "Really, Dad," she insisted, "we're okay. Thomas wouldn't want you to disrupt your life." I made my voice wobble a little, allowing emotion to creep in. "I lost Patricia. I can't lose Thomas too. Please, Caroline, let me help. I'm rattling around that big house all alone anyway. Another pause. I could almost hear her thinking, calculating. Well, if it means that much to you, I suppose it would be all right, she finally conceded. But just for a few days. We don't want to impose on your time. No imposition at all, dear, I said, trying to sound genuinely relieved. I'll pack a bag and come over this afternoon. When I arrived at Thomas and Caroline's house that afternoon, my son answered the door. He looked even worse than he had on Tuesday. His skin had a grayish tinge, and his hands trembled as he hugged me. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he asked, confused. "Your wife invited me," I replied. "I thought I could help out while you're not feeling well." Caroline appeared behind him, all smiles. Come in, come in. I've set up the guest room for you. It'll be so nice having you here." I had indeed brought a bag with clothes, but hidden at the very bottom were 3 small cameras Bill had lent me. Tiny things, wireless, motion-activated. That evening, while Caroline was busy making dinner and Thomas was resting upstairs, I carefully placed them. One was tucked behind the cookbook stand in the kitchen, with a clear view of the counter and coffee maker. Another was hidden among the decorative items on the hutch in the dining room. The third was positioned in the upstairs hallway, strategically placed to see the bedroom doors. Jake knew I was there, but we had agreed to pretend we weren't coordinating. When he came down for dinner, he just gave me a subtle nod. "Hey, Grandpa." "Hey, kiddo. How's school?" I asked, playing my part. "Fine." Dinner was, as expected, uncomfortable. Caroline had made spaghetti and meatballs. I watched carefully as she served everyone. Thomas's plate seemed to come from a different pot than mine and Jake's. When Thomas wasn't looking, I distinctly saw her sprinkle something extra onto his pasta. Spice, she'd claim if anyone asked. But I knew better. Thomas ate mechanically, barely tasting his food. Jake, meanwhile, picked at his meal. I made polite conversation, asking Caroline about her day, complimenting her cooking, and playing the role of the grateful, oblivious father-in-law. After dinner, Thomas went upstairs to lie down, clearly unwell. Caroline suggested Jake do his homework. Once we were alone, she made me tea. I watched her like a hawk, but she didn't add anything to mine. She just smiled and chatted about how nice it was to have family around. "Thomas is so lucky to have you," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "Not every son has a father who cares so much." "He's my boy, my only child," I replied, letting emotion creep into my voice. "After Patricia died, he's all I have left." I paused, then added, "Well, Thomas and Jake, of course." "Of course," Caroline echoed, but something flickered in her eyes, a momentary tightening. "Jake's a good kid, smart, takes after his father." "Yes, he certainly does," I agreed. She sipped her tea. "You know, Dad, I've been thinking, when Thomas inherits your estate someday, far in the future, obviously, have you made sure all your paperwork is in order? I'd hate for there to be any confusion or legal complications. It can be so stressful for families." There it was, not even subtle. She was already thinking about my money. "Oh, everything's in order," I said, forcing a casual tone. "I updated my will just last year with my lawyer, Margaret Chen. She's very thorough. Everything goes to Thomas, and if anything happens to him, it all goes to Jake. Family first, you know." Caroline's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, a fleeting mask of annoyance. "Very sensible," she managed. That night, I lay awake in the guest room with my laptop, watching the camera feeds on the monitoring software Bill had set up for me. At 11:47 p.m., Caroline emerged from the bedroom. She was wearing a robe, moving quietly down the hallway. I held my breath as she descended the stairs. The kitchen camera picked her up. She went straight to a cabinet above the refrigerator, the one where they kept things they rarely used. She pulled out a small bottle and a syringe. Then she meticulously prepared tomorrow's coffee, Thomas's special blend that he drank every single morning. She carefully added the liquid from the bottle to the coffee grounds, measuring precisely. When she was done, she put everything away and went back upstairs. I had it. Video evidence of her tampering with Thomas's coffee. Bill had warned me not to confront her. Not yet. We needed to catch her with the actual drugs in her possession. We needed to document the whole thing properly for the police. Friday morning, the police would be here with a warrant. Bill had already laid the groundwork with his former colleagues, showing them my photos from the storage unit. They were taking this seriously, but I absolutely couldn't let Thomas drink that coffee. At 6 a.m. Friday morning, I got up before anyone else. I went downstairs and quietly dumped the entire container of poisoned coffee grounds down the garbage disposal. I then replaced it with a fresh container from the pantry. When Caroline came down at 6:30, I was sitting casually at the kitchen table reading the newspaper as if I'd been there for hours. "Morning, Dad. You're up early." "Old habits," I smiled at her. "Never could sleep past 6 o'clock. I made a fresh pot of coffee. That blend Thomas likes was empty, so I opened a new one. Hope that's okay." Her face froze for just a second, a flicker of panic. Then the smile returned, forced. "Oh, that's fine, thank you." Thomas came down at 7 o'clock, looking worse than ever. He said he had vomited during the night and felt dizzy. Caroline immediately switched into her caring wife mode, feeling his forehead, suggesting he skip work. "Maybe you should go to the hospital," I suggested, trying to sound concerned. "Have them run those tests." "His appointment is this afternoon," Caroline said quickly, a little too quickly. "The specialist can see him at 2 p.m. We should just wait for that." "I really think we should go now," I pressed, looking directly at my son. "Thomas, you look terrible, son." "I'm okay, Dad," he slurred, his words barely coherent. Whatever she'd been giving him was clearly still active in his system from yesterday. "Just need rest." Jake came down for breakfast, his backpack ready for school. He looked at his father with undisguised worry. "I don't want to go to school," Jake said suddenly. "I want to stay with Dad." "You need to go to school," Caroline said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Your father will be fine. I'm taking him to his appointment later." "I'll drive him," I offered, trying to take control. "You look tired, Caroline. Why don't you stay home and rest? I'll make sure Thomas gets to his appointment." For a brief moment, I saw pure anger flash across her face. Then she composed herself, her smile thin. "That's sweet, but I need to be there to talk to the doctors about his symptoms." The doorbell rang at 8:15 a.m. Caroline went to answer it, and I heard her voice rise in surprise. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm Detective Sarah Morrison with the Winnipeg Police Service," a calm voice replied. "This is my partner, Detective James Park. We have a warrant to search these premises." I stood up as 3 uniformed officers entered behind the detectives. Caroline's face went absolutely white. "Search warrant for what? There must be some mistake." Detective Morrison held up the paper. "No mistake, ma'am. We have reason to believe evidence of a crime is located on these premises. Specifically, we'll be searching for certain medications and documents." "This is outrageous, Thomas. Tell them," Caroline cried, but Thomas was looking confused, struggling to follow what was happening. Jake had backed against the wall, his eyes wide, a mixture of fear and relief. "Actually, officers," I said, stepping forward, "I have some information that might help. I've been documenting evidence for the past few days." I pulled out my phone and held it out to Detective Morrison, showing her the video footage from last night, the kitchen camera. Caroline spun to face me, her eyes blazing. "You've been spying on us in our own home." "I've been protecting my son," I retorted, my voice firm, "which is more than you've been doing." They found everything. The bottle of scopolamine, cleverly hidden in the cabinet above the refrigerator, the syringes, wrapped in a towel in the master bedroom, Caroline's notebook, which she had apparently brought home from the storage unit. They even found the doctored coffee grounds in the garbage disposal. And when they finally got to the storage unit itself, they found all 3 boxes exactly as I'd photographed them. Caroline began to talk once she fully realized the overwhelming amount of evidence they had against her. She wasn't exactly confessing, but she was trying desperately to justify her actions. She claimed Thomas was mentally unstable, that she was just trying to help him. She insisted the will was legitimate, that he had wanted to provide for her. She even asserted the medication was prescribed by a doctor, though she couldn't name a single one. None of her claims held up. The forensics team found her fingerprints on the forged will. They also found her brother's fingerprints, which led to his arrest the same day. It turned out he had a record: fraud, forgery, and he'd served 2 years. Caroline had a history too, once they started digging. 2 previous marriages. Both husbands had died, one from a heart attack, one from an accidental drug overdose. Neither death had been thoroughly investigated at the time. Thomas was rushed to the hospital. The doctors confirmed scopolamine poisoning and told us that if it had continued much longer, it could have caused permanent brain damage or even death. They immediately put him on a detox protocol. It took 3 agonizing weeks before he was lucid enough to truly understand what had happened to him. Jake stayed with me during that time. We turned my spare bedroom into his room, putting up posters of his favorite bands and getting him a better desk for homework. He was quiet those first few days, silently processing everything. Then, one night at dinner, he just broke down crying. "I should have said something sooner," he sobbed. "I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to prove it. I was scared no one would believe me. I thought maybe I was imagining things." I held my grandson close as he cried. "You saved your father's life, Jake," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "You were smart and brave. You found that storage unit. You gave me the information I needed. Don't ever think you didn't do enough." Thomas made a full recovery. Physically, at least. Emotionally, it took much longer. The betrayal he felt was profound. He had loved Caroline, trusted her completely. Discovering she had been slowly killing him for money was absolutely devastating. He went to therapy, and honestly, we all did. Family therapy, individual therapy. We needed it to heal. The trial took place 8 months later. Caroline was charged with attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and a dozen other counts. Her brother was charged as an accomplice. The evidence against them was overwhelming. My video footage, Thomas's medical records, the forged documents, Caroline's notebook detailing her poisoning schedule. The prosecution even exhumed her previous husbands, finding evidence of poisoning in both cases. Caroline was sentenced to 25 years to life. Her brother received 15 years. The judge called it one of the most calculated, callous attempts at murder he had seen in his entire career. Thomas sold the house. Too many bad memories haunted its walls. He bought a smaller place not far from mine. Jake decided to stay in Winnipeg full-time instead of splitting his time with his mother in Toronto. He's 17 now, thriving in school, and planning to study criminal justice in university. He tells me he wants to help people like his father, people who don't see the danger until it's too late. As for me, I learned some truly important lessons from this whole ordeal. First, I learned to trust my instincts. I knew something was wrong with Thomas. Even when I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, I should have acted on that feeling sooner. Second, I learned to listen to the young people in my life. Jake saw what was happening before any of us adults did. His perspective was absolutely invaluable. Third, I realized that family doesn't always mean blood, and blood doesn't always mean family. Caroline was legally family, but she was a predator. The family that truly matters is the one that shows up, that protects, that loves unconditionally. I also learned that evil often wears a charming mask. Caroline seemed perfect. She said all the right things, did all the right things. She fooled everyone, including me, for months. But looking back, there were signs, small inconsistencies, if I had only been paying closer attention. The way she subtly isolated Thomas from his friends, how she discouraged him from seeing doctors for his symptoms until she could control the narrative. The way she pushed me to update my estate planning. Now, looking back, I can clearly see the manipulation. But in the moment, when someone is friendly and kind and calls you dad, you desperately want to believe the best in them. That, I now understand, is what predators count on. They count on our better nature, our inherent desire to trust, our reluctance to believe the worst about people. I often think about the men Caroline killed before she ever got to Thomas. They probably had families who missed them, who mourned them, who never, ever knew the truth. Their deaths were simply ruled natural causes or accidents. If Jake hadn't been so observant, if he hadn't been brave enough to investigate and then trust me with what he found, Thomas would have been another victim. And then I would have been next. And eventually, probably Jake too. Caroline wanted it all, and she was willing to kill everyone in her way to get it. Now, whenever I share this story, people inevitably ask me what they should watch for. How can you really tell when someone is dangerous? The truth is, you can't always tell, but there are definitely red flags. Moving too fast in relationships, isolating their partner from friends and family, showing excessive interest in finances and inheritance, inconsistencies in their background or stories, and being charming in public but acting very differently in private. Most importantly, I've learned to pay close attention when someone vulnerable, especially a child, tries to tell you something is wrong. Jake tried to tell me in his own way. He couldn't just come right out and say, "My stepmother is poisoning my father," because he was a kid, and that sounded crazy even in his own head. But he found a way to point me in the right direction. Children often see what adults miss because they're not as invested in maintaining social niceties. They call things as they see them, unfiltered. These days, Thomas, Jake, and I have dinner together every Sunday. We cook together, share stories, and laugh about the good memories we have of Patricia. We've rebuilt our family stronger than ever before because we've survived something truly terrible together. We know what we almost lost, and we don't take each other for granted anymore. Jake graduates high school next year. Thomas is dating again, though he's taking it very, very slow this time. I continue working on my woodworking projects in the garage. Life is ordinary, quiet, normal. And after everything we went through, ordinary feels like an absolute blessing. I'm 68 now. Some people might think I'm too old to have played detective, to have set up cameras and gathered evidence and helped catch a killer. But age doesn't make you helpless. It makes you experienced. I've lived long enough to know when something doesn't feel right, long enough to trust that instinct, long enough to know that sometimes the people who need protecting most won't directly ask for help. You have to be watching. You have to be willing to act. If Patricia were here, I know she'd say I did the right thing. She'd be incredibly proud of Jake for his courage. She'd be eternally grateful that Thomas survived. She'd probably also give me some grief for taking risks at my age, for putting myself in potential danger. But she would absolutely understand why I did it, because family is everything, and you protect what you love, no matter the cost. The day Caroline was sentenced, Jake asked me if I was glad it was all over. I told him the truth. I'm glad she can't hurt anyone else. I'm glad Thomas is safe. I'm glad we're all still here, still together. But I'll never be glad that any of this happened. I wish Thomas had never met Caroline. I wish Jake had never had to carry the burden of suspicion and fear. I wish I'd never had to see my son deteriorating, never had to search through that storage unit and discover the depths of someone's cruelty. But we don't get to choose what happens to us in life. We only get to choose how we respond. And I choose to be grateful. Grateful that Jake was so observant and brave. Grateful that I trusted him. Grateful that the police took us seriously. Grateful that Thomas survived. Grateful for every ordinary Sunday dinner, every normal conversation, every moment of peace. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still think about what could have happened. If Jake had waited one more day to give me that note, if I had dismissed his concerns, if the police hadn't been willing to investigate, how incredibly close we came to losing everything. It keeps me awake sometimes, the weight of those what-ifs. But then morning comes. Jake texts me a meme he found funny. Thomas calls to ask if I want to catch a hockey game. Life keeps moving forward. And I'm reminded that we're here, we're safe, and we're together. That's all that really matters in the end. Not the money Caroline wanted, not the inheritance she was willing to kill for. Just this, a father, a son, a grandson, making it through another day together. I want to tell you, watch out for your loved ones. Trust the people who care enough to notice when something's wrong. Don't ignore warning signs just because they seem too outlandish to be true. Evil exists, and sometimes it sits across from you at the dinner table with a smile on its face. But love exists too. Courage exists. Justice exists. And sometimes, when you're lucky and brave and persistent, the good guys actually win. That's the lesson I want people to take from our story. Not that you should be paranoid or suspicious of everyone, but that vigilance and love aren't opposite things. Protecting someone means paying attention. It means trusting your gut. It means being willing to act even when it's uncomfortable, even when you might be wrong, even when it's scary. Because in the end, I'd rather be wrong and look foolish than be right and lose my son. Every single time. That's what family means to me. And no amount of money, no inheritance, no estate is worth more than the people you love. Caroline never understood that. She saw us all as obstacles between her and wealth. But wealth without love is just numbers in an account. It's meaningless. Thomas understands that now more than ever. Jake's always understood it. And I've known it since the day Patricia and I brought Thomas home from the hospital 67 years ago. A tiny bundle of possibility and hope. That, to me, is true wealth. Everything else is just details.